Where do you look for fulfillment? According to the Buddha, you're almost certainly looking in the wrong place. We all want to be happy. Whatever we do, whatever we desire, we do or desire because we think it's going to make us happy. By happiness, I don't just mean immediate pleasure, though we do that too. But we also do lots of things that don't give us immediate pleasure, but we do it in thinking that it's going to make our life work out. And so in that sense, what we're really seeking is, you could say, a kind of salvation, by which I just mean having our life work, right? Being fulfilled. But according to the Buddha, the desires we act on are almost always misguided and precisely will not produce that result of, salvation and happiness. By salvation, I really don't mean anything otherworldly or life after death or anything like that, right? On the contrary, the Buddha is very much talking about you as a this-worldly being, a being, as he says, who's subject to birth, death, sickness, and old age. But the problem is when we, being very this-worldly, imagine that getting some other this-worldly thing, something else that's subject to birth, death, sickness, old age, thinking that getting something like that is going to make us happy. Now, what do I mean by getting something like that? Well, there is this attempt just to possess, and we certainly are guilty of that. Consumerism is a huge characteristic of contemporary people. We think we're going to buy things and that's going to make our life work out. So that's certainly an example of the kind of thing he's criticizing. But he's also criticizing other things, thinking that, friendship or love, much nicer things, are going to be the things that are going to save your life. Why is that? Because those things are all based on sort of being the person you already take yourself to be and then trying to find the things that answer to that person's desires rather than asking yourself, who am I? What am I? Right? And figuring out what's going on with you in the first place. That's the thing that you really have to do. So the point is, you're not going to solve the problems of this life by finding something from within it. Rather, the issue for us is to sort ourselves out and figure out who we are, figure out where our desires are coming from. Basically, what he says is that what you normally think of as yourself is more or less a constructed thing. Like you were born being brought up to think of yourself a certain way, to want certain things. Your society tells you all kinds of things that you should want and so on. And what happens is we build ourselves up as someone who's trying to be that person that our upbringing and our society has projected on us. And that says you need all these things. You got to have all these things to satisfy you. Those things have been built into us as a kind of craving where we think, oh, I've got to have that in order to succeed by the standards that have been set for me. And that craving is basically unfulfillable, right? It's what you're really doing is, I guess, trying to get the stamp of approval from your society. You think, oh, I want to just have this attractive boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, as if that were the thing that were going to satisfy you. But it's not that. You're really through that thinking, oh, I'm going to win the prize. And so you're always in a way going to be still looking for that thing that you're supposed to get through getting this thing. And in that way, our desires, our cravings, as he calls them, are more or less like an addiction. When you're a drug addict, you think, oh, that, heroin or whatever it is you're going to take, nicotine, alcohol, that's going to be the thing that's going to make you happy. But it doesn't. It gives you some temporary feeling. But really, the only reason you wanted it in the first place was because you're an addict. And that's an unsatisfiable thing. It's not that that thing was desirable and getting it solves a problem. It's that you have a problem. And going after that thing rather than solving the problem is actually just feeding it, just a reflection of it. Well, the Buddha says that's really what all of our desires that come out of our sort of constructed self amount to. And when we pursue those things, what we're really doing is trying to find something in the world that's going to solve the problem of our life, rather than trying to figure out who we are. So they're really, the things that we normally think of as desires are ways of turning away from looking at ourselves. What do we need to do instead? Well, the Buddha's idea is that what you really need to learn to do is look at yourself and notice what you're doing when you're experiencing. So typically we ignore our own experience and we're just wrapped up in the things that our desires and our experience throw us out to. But he says, step back from that and notice what it is that you're doing when you're breathing, what it is that you're doing when you're walking, especially what it is that you're doing when you're desiring. The Buddhist idea is that rather than just acting from this constructed I, you're actually going to take it apart by learning to describe and notice what you're doing in your experiencing. And what you will do is you will see that you've been living out of a kind of a model of a self that's been driving you. You've been trying to live up to that. Like you've been trying to be a perfect woman or a perfect man or a perfect student or a perfect son or a perfect father. I shouldn't even say perfect, just a good one. You're just trying to live up to these models that you've inherited, models that have been pumped into you by advertising, whatever else. So in fact, here's the real thing. You weren't really even engaging with the world. You've been living with this model, right? That's that story of addiction. You thought that thing was desirable, but really it was a model you were hung up on that was defining you, right? And that's what your desires were revolving around. And so instead of really engaging with the real world, you've been living in this dream. And so what the Buddha wants you to do is wake up. When you do wake up and start to notice what you're doing, you're actually starting to become present to what's actually happening in experience. You're starting to see, oh, this is what happens when I feel this way or when this thing happens. You start to learn your triggers, you start to learn your responses, you start to learn your hang-ups, you start to learn your blind spots. And by understanding that, you start to see how experience as you had formerly encountered it was something not neutral, but something that only came up the way it did because of this structure of cravings and models and dreams, so to speak, that you brought to it. But in starting to take that apart, you're actually getting to the point where you are actually starting to become present to what's really happening. So what you learn is that you weren't actually ever being present to the situation before. But through learning to turn to your experience as it's unfolding, not to live from that model of an I that has been constructed in you, but actually to kind of calmly observe what's happening in your experience and how it works, you're starting to become present to the reality of what's actually happening. And that goes hand in hand with not being defined by those desires by which you crave these certain things as if they're going to satisfy you. So you start to learn then that what you really need to do is to be present to your experience and not to imagine that your happiness is going to come by getting something else or getting somewhere else. But you're actually going to learn for the first time to actually be here and see what's really going on without the sort of veil of those dreams, those socially constructed dreams that you've lived with. And that's actually going to be nirvana, right? That's actually finding that right here, being right here, is all that you need. It's all that there is. And you're going to stop looking for your salvation somewhere else.